Silent streets of Washington. It was late December, 1913. America slept. The streets of Washington, D.C., dusted in frost, were empty. Street lamps flickered faintly, casting long shadows over the quiet city. Inside the Capitol, only a handful of lawmakers remained, exhausted under dim lights. Most had gone home for the holidays, thinking of Christmas dinners, train rides, and family gatherings. And yet, in a small, shadowed chamber, history was about to be made. A decision so procedural, so technical, that almost no one would notice. But its impact would ripple across generations. The quiet chamber inside the Capitol, a few lawmakers debated quietly. The room was dim, papers scattered on desks, pens scratching slowly across documents. They discussed concepts few outside the room could understand: centralized control of money, stabilization of credit, prevention of financial panic. The Federal Reserve Act. Central banking. Signed quietly, after midnight. No celebration. No shouting. The silence itself allowed the decision to endure, shaping a nation in ways that would be invisible for years. Industrial America was growing, yet fragile. Factories hummed, cities expanded, and railroads stitched towns together. But beneath the surface lay instability. Banks failed often. Money disappeared. Panic spread. Entire communities could be left powerless overnight. In 1907, a financial panic had swept New York. Banks froze, credit vanished, businesses collapsed. People lost jobs, savings, everything they owned. The men in power remembered the fear. They asked, when will it happen again? How can it be prevented? The answer was boring in its brilliance: a centralized banking system to guide money, stabilize credit, and act during crises. It was technical, abstract, procedural. And yet, in its quiet design, it held the power to change a nation forever. Panic at the banks. Debates raged for years. Committees met. Reports were written. Economists argued over reserve requirements and interest rates. Most Americans never noticed. Most were busy with their lives, unaware that their future financial stability was being quietly designed. By December 1913, timing was perfect. Late December, weary lawmakers, low public attention, the ideal conditions for a decision to pass with minimal resistance. On December 23, 1913, the chamber was nearly empty. A few senators whispered their concerns. Pens scratched across paper. By morning, the world would continue as normal, unaware that the foundation of American money had shifted forever. Midnight signing. From that night forward, the Federal Reserve quietly guided the nation. Interest rates, credit, financial stability, all influenced by decisions made behind closed doors. Millions of lives would be touched, yet few would ever know why. Decades later, the Great Depression would test the system. Banks failed. Families lost everything. And yet, behind closed doors, the Federal Reserve acted, stabilizing the economy in silence. After World War II, the economy boomed. Mortgages, business loans, inflation, all subtly guided by the same quiet system. Even in the crises of the 1970s, its invisible hand continued to shape the nation. History rarely roars. Sometimes it whispers. It moves through offices, corridors, and shadowed rooms, especially after midnight. And sometimes, it never ends. The Federal Reserve Act was boring, unnoticed, almost irrelevant. Yet it transformed a nation, silently, invisibly, forever. Silent power in action. From that night forward, the Federal Reserve quietly shaped the flow of money across the nation. Decisions made behind closed doors affected millions of lives. Interest rates were adjusted, loans became more or less expensive, and banks operated with a new authority guiding their actions. Most Americans never noticed. They paid their bills, worked their jobs, and lived their lives as before. And yet, every purchase, every loan, every financial decision was subtly influenced by a system few could name. The Great Depression decades later, the nation would face one of its darkest economic crises. The Great Depression swept across America, bringing banks to collapse, businesses to ruin, and families to despair. People lined up outside shuttered banks, clutching whatever savings they had left. Behind closed doors, the Federal Reserve acted. Lending decisions, emergency interventions, and currency stabilization moved silently, shaping recovery in ways the public could feel but never see. The quiet decisions of decades earlier had become a lifeline during the chaos. Post-war boom. After World War II, the American economy surged. Cities grew, suburbs expanded, cars filled the roads, and factories produced goods at an unprecedented rate. Mortgages were granted, businesses flourished, and families enjoyed a growing standard of living. All of this was guided, invisibly, by the same institution created in that quiet room decades earlier. Policies adjusted credit, controlled inflation, and stabilized markets. It was invisible power at work, shaping opportunity for millions without drama, fanfare, or public awareness. Modern economy. By the 1970s and beyond, the Federal Reserve's influence became even more apparent, not through spectacle, but through subtle control. Inflation, interest rates, lending, and the cost of living all flowed through its decisions. Even as technology advanced and global trade expanded, the foundation laid in 1913 continued to direct the economic rhythm of America. Every home loan, car loan, business expansion, and financial recovery was shaped by choices made quietly, after midnight, more than half a century earlier. Most Americans never thought about it. Most never realized the invisible hand that guided their economic lives. Yet its impact was undeniable. Midnight reflection. History rarely announces itself with a roar. Sometimes it whispers. It moves quietly, in shadowed rooms, when no one is watching. The Federal Reserve Act, signed after midnight in 1913, is proof of this. Boring, procedural, almost invisible, and yet transformative. Every economic boom, every financial panic, every rise and fall of the American economy carries its influence. Even now, as skyscrapers rise and technology connects the world, the decisions made in that quiet, shadowed chamber continue to shape opportunity, risk, and stability. The midnight decision was almost irrelevant to those who lived through it. And yet, its consequences are timeless, invisible, and enduring. Sometimes, history whispers. And sometimes, it never ends.